Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Wanda Johnson. I'm the mother of Oscar Grant, who was killed January 1st, 2009 at the Fruitville BART station in Oakland, California. Oscar was killed by Officer Johannes Meserly while he was laying on the platform with Officer Tony Peroni with his knee on his neck, where Oscar was saying that he could not breathe.
Wanda, you and I have talked so many times since that happened to your son. And this summer we had this, this conversation when George Floyd was killed. And we were talking about like so much has changed and so much has stayed the same. And then it seemed like there was this almost global movement with where people were demanding change. And it seemed like maybe change was possible. And now here we are. The trial for Derek Chavin we're going to hear something, or they're going to start deliberating as soon as Monday. And there's another case in Minnesota that just happened this past weekend. They've just released footage today of another person of a 13-year-old in Chicago. How are you feeling right now?
Like we still have a lot of fighting to do. I continually look back at the history of our judicial system and know that we need to tear our judicial system down and rebuild it with all community members' input of different nationalities. Currently, if we look at our judicial system and what it was founded on, our policing, years ago, the policing was instructed to go find the runaway slaves and bring them back to their slave masters, and also to control the immigrants who would try to come into America and make them stay in an isolated area amongst themselves. And so if we look at the history of policing and we understand that that culture of policing is not too long ago, it's not far away from us today. It's not like it's been 100 years, because it hasn't. And so we have to really begin to tear down our policing system and rebuild it. And part of the way that we tear it down is we look at the separate Bill of Rights that our policing system has compared to the community, and begin to tear it down and rewrite it and rebuild it so that there's consequences for actions when they're taken unnecessarily by police officers. Because currently, I've been supporting a family out in Danville, California, and the young man, he was shot by the police. But this police officer is not at the first time, it was not the first time that he killed someone. This is actually the second time that he's killed someone. And now he's since asked to transfer to another precinct. No, we need to transfer him out of a job, being a police officer. And so when we allow the police to go from one police force to another after they have killed someone, we're doing a disservice to our community of people. And so we really have to work on our policing system and begin to rebuild it in the areas where it needs to be rebuilt at.
The case in Danville is one that's not on my radar. Do you want to talk really quickly about what this particular case is about and when this incident occurred?
So the young man who was killed in Danville, he suffered mental illness. We know that because he was living outside. Um, his father was at one time in the military. His mother lives in Las Vegas. And it was a report said that somebody was throwing rocks over the freeway. Okay. And the police saw him and started targeting him. And at that time, they said he had a pocket knife that he had out. And the police ended up shooting him, saying that they feared for their life. But what's so interesting and what's so uh, refutable about that is that the young man that he shot was almost 12 to 14 feet away from him. The young man wasn't even past the social distancing mark, and he wasn't even running towards the officer. But yet he was shot and killed by the officer, and the officer turned around and said he feared for his life. Unacceptable excuse. And we've used that same excuse far too many times. And so we have to, again, begin to look at our policing policies and procedures and begin to hold them accountable for their actions, because when they're not held accountable for their actions, they know that it's a free pass. They know that if they kill someone, they're going to get put on vacation, you might as well say. And then after vacation, maybe then they'll be able to come back to work.
And when did this incident occur?
This incident occurred, I believe, it has not even been 2 months, not even, I don't think even think a month, because I was just at the rally last Sunday.
And can you so we keep the person's name alive? Can you share that with us?
Now I can't even think of his name. Do you know that my I'm thinking I have to go to Stephen Taylor's. This young man's name was Taylor. What is Taylor's last name?
It's okay. We'll find it.
Jimmy, do you see my phone in there?
I'm gonna check right now. Taylor, okay, 13-year-old. No, we don't know the age.
No, the 13-year-old is from Chicago.
Right.
And I'm gonna tell you the young man's name. I went to one in Antioch as well. His name was Antonio. I'm going to tell you right now, because I know his name was Tyler. I can't think of Tyler's last name.
I think I got it. Tyrell Wilson. Does that sound right?
Mm. Tyler, his name.
Tyrell Wilson.
Maybe, let's see. Is that his name?
Yeah, that's the article about a man in Danville. Which
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, it's like, I think there is hope. Like, there was such defeat in what happened to George Floyd last summer, and then there was some hope, and then here we are again, and like we can't even keep track of the names, right?
Absolutely. It's just unbelievable that you say one name, and by the time you finish pronouncing and saying this person's name and you study that case, there's another one. We went from George Floyd to, and they don't even talk about Tyler, who was here in Danville. And then we go to Daunte in Minneapolis as well. And then now we're in Chicago, and we're in Virginia, even though the lieutenant didn't get killed. He was treated very aggressively by the officers, who have since, I think one has lost his job. And then, it's just happening so quickly that we must work to change our system by tearing it down and rebuilding it, so that these killings do not take place how they're taking place right now today.
So, of course, when we've heard the news of Daunte Wright, we can't help thinking about Oscar's case, right? What
Absolutely.
were you in this case? We hear the video. It sounds like the officer is running on pure adrenaline as she's saying taser, 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 and then apparently grabs the
Mm-hmm.
gun
Mm-hmm.
instead of the taser.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are you experiencing as you hear this case? And
So what I thought about, to be honest, was this a racial profile stop? I thought about that. This young man supposedly tags was supposed to be expired, but the reason for the stop because of the air fresheners hanging from the rear view mirror. Now, I would think that the police would have more important things to do than to stop someone because they have some air freshener hanging from their mirror. And when I first heard of what happened, I was at a disbelief to see that and hear and follow that she was in the process of training some rookies when she shot and killed this young man. I thought about how, as a 26-year-old veteran, I believe that's how many years she had, you should know the difference between a gun and a taser. You should know that one is heavier than the other. The gun is always heavier. You should know that usually they're different colors. The taser usually is a bright yellow color. Three, you should know that you're going into your pocket pulling your gun, but there is some kind of safety lock that you have to release first before pulling it out of the holster and shooting it. All these things should be some kind of a warning to remind you that, hey, this is not my taser, this is my gun. And I thought about how when Oscar told uh, Meserly, you shot me, uh, he then yelled, oh man, and used profanity, and then handcuffed Oscar. I thought about all that. And I thought about this young man, Daunte, how he possibly was scared, first of all, for being stopped and calling his mother and, asking his mother where the registration and stuff was. I thought about how he thought he would be going home and then they come up after and he end up losing his life. And then after losing his life, of course, the media begins to try to depict everything that he did that was wrong, to demonize him, to get you to believe that what happened to him he deserved. And if you look at some of the news feeds, that's exactly what people are saying, which is so absolutely wrong because we still continue to have people who could go into supermarkets and shoot a multitude of people and kill them and then come out of the store unharmed. We still have people able to go into churches and shoot up a church and come out of the church unharmed. And yet, a minor traffic stop, a minor, uh, you received a call, there was a fight on the train, you get there, there's no fight, there's nothing. And both these young men lost their lives. And both of the officers are claiming and saying, oh, I thought I was going to tase him. And for me, the reason why I don't believe that with Meserly is because Oscar's last picture of Officer Meserly was a picture of him taking a picture of Messerly with his taser pointed at him. And then 5 seconds later, you don't know the difference of where it's at. It's fabrication. And this lady, I believe, was overzealous. And because of her overzealousness in the midst of her training, that she ended up shooting and killing someone. A life who's never, a child who's never going to get to see their father again. A mother who's now don't have a son, because of a senseless traffic stop.
Yeah, when you say overzealous, say more about that, because I think we can hear that. And I hadn't realized that she was training people, which is concerning because Derek Chavin was also training, and it makes us wonder if in the midst of training is when they go power hungry. But it's concerning. If both of these incidents are examples of times when people were training and people end up dead, this is a big problem.
Absolutely. So that tells us that there's something wrong with our training system in America with policing. And why is it that we as Americans have the worst problems with shooting and killing civilians than other countries? What is it that we're doing here? How come we have gotten so freely with using a gun to kill people? It's just unheard of in other states, like all the killing that we're doing here in America by those hired to serve the communities. And they're not serving, it's a disservice to the community when people continue to lose their lives unjustly.
Thank you. And yes, so we know that the young man who was killed on Sunday was a father. Your son is a father. He would be a grandfather today. Or yeah, he would already, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, and this story is not an anomaly. It's not like this is the second case that happened since Oscar was killed. There's so many that we can't keep track of. Even, there's more that are coming into the news today as we speak. What will it take to shift things, do you think?
A rebuilding of the police force, a rebuilding of the whole policing mentality. If we don't do that, we're going to continue to have the outbreak of killings that we are having. It's like killing after killing after killing, and it's been senselessly, unnecessarily. And we have to work to change our policing and judicial system so that African Americans and brown young men are not killed at such a higher rate than any other nationality.
And one more question about this case in Minneapolis, then a Floyd question, and we'll try to kind of wind down here. I'm just coming back to your description of her as like overzealous, and I felt like when I heard her, it sounded like she was very anxious, like not somebody who, like you said, had 2.5 decades of experience under their belt. Do you think this is what's happening for her? Is it I mean, we're just speculating at this point, but I'm questioning. It's like, did her racism kick in at such a level that she couldn't like bring it down? I don't know. I'm just curious if you can say anything else that you felt when you heard her kind of reaction and you saw the last seconds of this man's life.
You know what? I've been thinking and looking at some of these instances of what's going on with our people. And many of the times you will see the victim, the one who gets killed, trying to de-escalate the situation. And the officers are escalating the situation. And instead of the officers trying to calm it down and, do what they need to do, they're more hyphy, is what the youth would say, or they're more amped up than the person who they're arresting. And so we really have to look at that, you know, and make a decision. Are we hiring the right people for the right jobs? And obviously, we're not doing that. And so I think about for this young man, this the police officer, she was uh, having her adrenaline run. And I don't know if it was because she was in the midst of training, but she nevertheless, in the middle of her training, um, she shot a shot that's not reversible. This man is no longer here. And she's going to and is being charged with what, second degree manslaughter.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about that, and that all plays out. And then I'm thinking about, I was actually looking up the man's name while we're talking. There's other cases that exemplify that police do have the ability to use restraint. And it's interesting that the restraint is used for people like, we think about Kyle Rittenhouse. I'm probably mispronouncing his
Hmm.
last name, but he walked past police. He drove
Hmm.
home, and he's not behind bars right now
Hmm.
because somebody
Hmm.
um and we've people who've been involved in mass shootings in some cases, particularly when they've happened to be white or non-black.
Hmm.
These people often do come out, and so I'm kind of scratching my head here. I don't even know what the right question to ask, but yeah, I guess what are you taking from that? Because those examples show that restraint is used, but somebody's using discretion about when they use restraint.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the history of policing. In my opinion, it goes back to how the police inception began. And the police inception began was to basically control the generation of African American people by assuring if they ran away, they would go get them, they would whoop them and beat them and send them back to their slave master or put them in jail. And even at times, they would work to end up killing them. And so, all that's a form of control. And so, because it's a form of control, uh, that control is still going on today. And so we really have to look at it, because when you look at the control, only a certain group of people is manifested, and that control is being um, enforced toward the group of African American people versus when you're dealing with the situation with the Caucasian person.
Yeah. Um, and I think you're right. It just keeps underscoring, right? So in these historical times that you're referencing during the era of slavery, like white people got away with anything at that point, and still today that.
Hmm.
Yes. Okay. So we have some work. There's systemic change that needs to happen. And I keep thinking, like last summer, I was sure when we were having this conversation that that change was about to happen. How hopeful are you today about change?
Well, we have to start all over again and work on getting some of these laws changed. Of course, we know that there'll be protests probably throughout the country, and millions of dollars that will end up having to be spent to rebuild communities. But you know, I think about how the riots are a voice of the unheard. And if this is a way to be heard, then our community of people and the people, the allies, have to do how they feel necessary to ensure that they're being heard, or that we're being heard, and saying what is taking place is definitely not right.
So we can't let you go without talking about about Derek Chavin's trial. I almost had a slip of the tongue and said George Floyd's trial, because in some ways, even though he's dead, he's being tried for his struggles with addiction. He's being tried for his past. He's been,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yet the thing that I'm seeing, though, that's giving me some hope, is that officers that were around him and on his police force with him are speaking out against him, and the evidence seems very highly stacked against him. And there's a preponderance of evidence, right? And it shows, and medical officials said that it should have been, an intervention should have been offered, and bystanders offered that, and these people have testified. How hopeful are you that he will be held accountable in the law?
I'm hopeful that he will be held accountable in the law. Um, I also know it takes one juror to get a hung jury. And we never know who's on the jury pool, who was picked. And oftentimes we have an idea about them because of the interview uh, before they was accepted as a juror. But when we think about it, um, we knew from the very beginning that this man was guilty of something, right? He was guilty of murder. And our society tried to downplay that, to say, well, he was using drugs. Well, he had a heart attack. Well, he inhaled the carbon monoxide. Well, he had all these underlining diseases that was in his body, uh, drug habit, all these different things where our society or our judicial system would try to shift the blame from the officer and put it on him, on the victim who's deceased. And so my prayer and my hope is that the officer is found guilty, even though that's not really enough. What would be enough is for George Floyd to be still here and his life not taken. But because it is, it has to be another catalyst to work with for change in our society. That that officers can no longer put their knee on the individual's neck like they're doing and just hold it there for that excessive amount of time, like George Floyd, even like my son Oscar, and so many others.
Yes. And there's this adrenaline component that we talk about, where so quickly in this heat of the moment, somebody gets overzealous or yes, that's Oscar Grant.
Yep.
Mom, my Esty was asking if, like, you're talking about Oscar Grant, and I told her that's Oscar Grant's mom right there. And I guess the thing that's different about this case than these other ones, where people are quick to pull a gun, or they pull a gun instead of the taser, is that it was almost 10 minutes, right? Like, and it was like a slow, agonized, like he had so many chances to make a shift or to change
Yep.
behavior. If you had to speculate based on, I know you watch people's behavior and you live by this issue, what do you think got in the way of him just changing his behavior or listening to one of those bystanders that day?
Are you talking about Messerly or Chavez?
Chavin. Messerly, he quickly did that.
I think that the officers with him had a judicial responsibility to get their partner and say, let's handle this a different way. I also believe that because they did not do that, that they are just as guilty as he is, and that they should be held accountable as well. And I believe in August or something, they go to trial for themselves. They should be found guilty as well. And the reason why is because if you and I did a crime together, we would both find ourselves sitting in jail. We would both either have different trials, or they would put us together and we would go to trial, but we would both be found uh, guilty until proven innocent. In this case, we have found that our society is trying to make Chavez innocent when we, the people, can see that he is guilty. And so the officers that was with him, they are just as guilty as well.
So last question, unless we think of something else. What are you doing next? Like, this issue is big and it just keeps growing bigger. What's next on your to-do list?
Well, after tomorrow, I have a few more interviews. Sunday, it is Stephen Taylor's anniversary of being killed by the police, the San Leandro Police Department in Walmart. And so I'll be supporting that family at that event, encouraging them to continue their fight, to don't give up, because oftentimes our society just wants us to throw in the towel and give up. And then they say, oh, we think it's acceptable because the families are not fighting. But you have to continually fight to make sure that justice is served for our loved ones.
Thank you so much, Wanda, for taking the time.
You are so welcome.